The morning mist still clung to the narrow stretch of highway like a pale shroud. The sun, faint and uncertain, filtered through layers of cloud, giving the world a washed-out silver hue. On the side of the road where grass met gravel, a small, colorful stall stood beneath a patchwork awning of faded red and yellow canvas. The sign above it read in bold, careful letters, "Fresh Harvest." Lena Moritz sat behind her makeshift counter, wrapped in an old quilted jacket over her summer dress. The air was still damp from last night's rain, and the chill crept through the seams of her sleeves. She rubbed her hands together, watching the steam rise from the paper cup of weak coffee beside her basket of wild berries. It wasn't much, just a folding table, a scale, and a few wooden crates filled with raspberries and blueberries she picked herself from the forest nearby. But it was hers. Her savings, what little she had left after selling her car and leaving the city, were tied up in this stand. The hope that it could become something more than survival, something like a beginning, was what kept her sitting there morning after morning. The world was quiet except for the distant hum of engines somewhere beyond the fog. She had chosen this curve in the road carefully. Cars slowed down here and drivers could see her colorful tint from a distance. Sometimes truckers stopped to buy a small basket to take home. Sometimes no one came at all. Lena adjusted her sign, straightened a crate, and looked down the empty road again. A droplet of rain fell from the edge of the awning and splashed against her wrist. She sighed and whispered to herself, half in prayer, half in encouragement, "Today will be better. It has to be." The sound of an approaching engine broke the silence, low at first, then swelling fast, far too fast. A pair of headlights cut through the fog like blades of white fire. Lena stood, shielding her eyes. The vehicle appeared suddenly, a black sports car, sleek and gleaming even under the dim light. The music came before the man, a blast of rhythm echoing through the mist, loud enough to make the ground tremble. The car was moving recklessly, tires hissing on wet asphalt. Lena's heart leapt. "Slow down," she whispered, as if her voice could reach the driver. It didn't. The tires screamed, the car fishtailed once, twice, then shot off the road. There was a flash of motion, the metallic shriek of twisting metal, the violent crash of wood and canvas. Time fractured into fragments, the world turning white with shock, the sudden sting of cold mud, the muffled sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. When everything stopped, she found herself on the ground, her dress soaked and her hair heavy with rainwater and dirt. For a long moment she didn't move. The scent of crushed berries filled the air, sharp, sweet, and tragic. Her stand was gone. The tent had collapsed, its frame bent and broken. Red juice bled across the gravel like spilled paint. Lena slowly pushed herself upright, wincing as she looked at the ruin before her. Her dream, her fragile, stubborn dream, lay shattered at her feet. The car door opened with a smooth mechanical click. A tall man in an immaculate gray suit stepped out, brushing invisible dust off his sleeve before even glancing at the destruction he had caused. His hair was slicked back, his shoes untouched by mud. When his eyes finally met Lena's, there was irritation there, not guilt. He turned to inspect the fender of his car, running his hand along the surface. "Damn," he muttered. "It's scratched." Lena could hardly believe it. She stood trembling, her face streaked with dirt and tears. The man looked around, then sighed and finally acknowledged her presence with a raised brow. "You shouldn't be this close to the road," he said coolly. "It's dangerous for both of us." His tone made something in her chest twist tight. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck. All she could do was stare at him, speechless with anger. From the other side of the car, another door opened. This time it was an older man. His posture straight, his eyes sharp but kind. His silver mustache twitched slightly as he took in the scene. He said nothing for a moment, only shook his head and exhaled. The younger man noticed the look and muttered, "Don't start, Dad. It was an accident." But Lena wasn't listening to their exchange. She was looking at the crushed crates, the scattered fruit, the sign that once said "Fresh Harvest" now torn in half. She felt something burning inside. Not just grief but defiance. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but shaking with fury. "You destroyed everything I have," she said. The younger man turned back to her, his face unreadable. Then with a small sigh, he reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills. He held them out carelessly. "Here," he said. That should cover it. Lena stared at the money, then at him. The insult of it was worse than the crash. That's not enough, she said quietly. He smirked. It's more than your berries were worth. Something in her eyes, the cold, steady anger of someone who has already lost too much, made him falter for half a second. Then he chuckled, shaking his head. You can't be serious. But Lena didn't back down. Before the argument could continue, the older man stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. Ethan, he said, his tone calm but commanding. That's enough. He turned to Lena. My name is Richard Rowe. And you are? Lena, she said, her voice hoarse. Richard nodded slowly, studying her face. Lena, I can see this business meant a great deal to you. I'm truly sorry for what happened. My son will take responsibility. But I also think, he paused, a thoughtful look in his eyes. I also think this might not be the end of your story. Perhaps even the beginning of something else. Lena frowned, not understanding. Richard smiled faintly. Come with us. We have a meeting in the city. I can't promise much, but if you have the courage to stand up for what's yours, you might just belong there more than you think. Ethan looked at his father in disbelief. You can't be serious. I'm entirely serious, Richard interrupted smoothly. Then to Lena he added, if you want a chance to change your life, get in the car. Lena looked back at her ruined stall, at the broken sign, the mud, the scattered fruit, then at the two men. The choice was absurd, reckless, impossible. And yet, as the mist began to lift, she felt something stir deep within her. A spark of the same stubborn hope that had made her build that stand in the first place. She took a deep breath. All right, she said. I'll come. The drive began in heavy silence. The black sedan purred along the wet highway, its interior filled with the faint scent of leather and expensive cologne. Lena sat in the back seat, her hands clenched in her lap, staring out the window. Her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost, pale, smudged with dirt, her hair tangled. Ethan sat up front, gripping the steering wheel, his jaw set tight. His father, Richard, occupied the passenger seat beside him, watching the road with the calm authority of a man used to giving orders and being obeyed. Every few minutes, he would glance at Lena through the rearview mirror, as though measuring her, trying to decide what exactly she was made of. Lena didn't know what to think. The events of the last hour felt unreal, like waking from a dream into another dream. Her small world had collapsed in a single deafening instant, and now she was sitting in a car worth more than her entire life savings. She still wasn't sure why she'd agreed to come. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was because when Richard Rowe had looked at her, he hadn't seen a broken girl selling berries. He had seen something more. The silence finally broke. So, Ethan said, his tone sharp as a knife, do you often set up shop in the middle of the road? Or was today a special occasion? Lena looked up slowly, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. It wasn't the middle of the road, she said evenly. It was off the shoulder. I checked the regulations. He gave a short, humorless laugh. Oh, she checked the regulations. That's adorable. Ethan. Richard's voice was quiet but firm. His son exhaled loudly and said nothing more. The tension in the car thickened. Lena turned her gaze back to the window. Trees flashed by, wet trunks, streaks of green and gray. Her reflection in the glass was calm now, but inside her thoughts were racing. Finally Richard spoke, breaking the quiet. Tell me, Lena, what made you start selling berries by the road? She hesitated. I needed a fresh start, she said softly. And I wanted to build something that was mine, even if it was small. Richard nodded thoughtfully. That's a good reason. Most people these days want the easy route. It's rare to see someone willing to start from the ground up. Ethan rolled his eyes. Dad, come on. She's selling berries, not launching a company. Richard didn't look at him. You'd be surprised how many great businesses began with something just as simple. Ethan scoffed, but his father's tone left no room for argument. The car slowed as they approached a busy intersection leading into the outskirts of the city. Skyscrapers loomed in the distance, their glass sides reflecting the pale light of morning. Lena hadn't been here since she'd left months ago. The sight made her chest tighten. Richard turned slightly in his seat to face her. We're heading to a business meeting. My son's startup is in the middle of a negotiation with investors. It's an important deal, make or break, you might say. Lena blinked, unsure why he was telling her this. And you want me there, why? Because, he said with a small smile, sometimes people like you see what others can't. You fought for every coin you've made. That kind of perspective is worth listening to. Ethan gave an incredulous laugh. You're not actually planning to let her sit in on the meeting, are you? I am, Richard replied calmly. You might learn something from it. Ethan shook his head, muttering under his breath. Unbelievable. Lena felt her pulse quicken. She didn't know what to say, but a strange mix of fear and curiosity settled over her. What could a man like Richard possibly want from her? They stopped at a traffic light. Outside, the city pulsed with life. People rushing along sidewalks, horns echoing, lights flickering in office towers. It was a world she used to belong to and then lost. When the light turned green, Ethan pressed the accelerator. At least let's stop somewhere so she can, look presentable, he said. You can't take her into a boardroom like this. Richard glanced at him. Good idea. And you'll be paying for it. What? Ethan snapped. Richard smiled faintly. You caused the mess. You'll help clean it up. Lena almost smiled for the first time that morning. They pulled into the parking lot of an upscale shopping complex. Ethan parked with a visible scowl and turned to his father. This is ridiculous. I'm not. You are, Richard said simply. Then to Lena. Come on. Let's get you cleaned up. Ethan stayed behind, sulking in the driver's seat as the two of them stepped out. The air was warmer here, heavy with the smell of coffee and perfume drifting from open doors. People glanced at Lena as she walked past, at her muddy dress, her scraped hands. But Richard's calm, confident presence made her hold her head high. Inside, under the soft glow of boutique lights, a saleswoman approached with a rehearsed smile that faltered when she saw Lena's condition. Before she could say anything, Richard handed her a credit card. Find her something suitable. Simple, professional. We'll wait. Lena felt the heat rise in her cheeks. I can't let you. It's not charity, he interrupted. It's an investment. She wanted to argue, but there was a steadiness in his eyes that silenced her. Half an hour later, she emerged from the fitting room transformed. Her new outfit was modest, a tailored navy suit, a cream blouse and clean shoes, but it felt like armor. Her hair, freshly brushed and tied back, revealed a face she almost didn't recognize in the mirror. When Richard saw her, he smiled approvingly. You've worn business clothes before. It wasn't a question. Lena hesitated, then nodded. A long time ago. I thought so, he said. You carry yourself like someone who hasn't forgotten. They walked back to the car in silence. As Lena opened the door, Ethan looked up from his phone and froze. For a brief, unguarded moment, he didn't seem to recognize her. Gone was the muddy, bedraggled roadside vendor. The woman standing before him looked calm, sharp, and confident. Someone who belonged anywhere she chose to stand. Are you getting in? Lena asked lightly, meeting his stunned gaze. He blinked, then cleared his throat. Yeah, sure. Richard chuckled as he settled back into the passenger seat. All right, son. Let's go make an impression. The car eased back into traffic, heading toward the heart of the city, toward whatever waited for them next. The city unfolded before them like a living machine. Humming streets, mirrored towers, and people in constant motion. Lena watched it all from the back seat, her fingers tightening on her lap every time they stopped at a light. Just hours ago, she'd been sitting by the roadside, praying for one more customer. Now she was heading into a corporate district in a car that cost more than she'd earned in a decade. Her reflection in the glass no longer looked like the same woman. The suit fit her perfectly, but she still felt like an intruder wearing someone else's skin. Up front, Ethan kept his eyes on the road, lips pressed into a thin line. He hadn't said a word since the shopping center, but his irritation was almost tangible, the kind of silence that hums with unsaid things. His father, Richard, seemed completely at ease, scrolling through something on his phone. When the car finally slowed before a gleaming high-rise of steel and glass, Richard looked back at Lena. This is it, he said simply. Our meeting's on the 24th floor. Lena swallowed. And what exactly am I supposed to do there? He smiled. Listen. Observe. Speak when you feel it's right. That's vague, she said. Good, he replied. That's how opportunity usually comes, vague and unexpected. Ethan parked the car and stepped out first, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked immaculate again, as though the entire morning's disaster hadn't happened. When he turned to Lena, his tone was polite but edged with sarcasm. Try not to embarrass us, all right? Before she could respond, Richard's voice cut through the air. Ethan. It wasn't loud, but it carried enough authority to make his son tense. Ethan looked away, jaw tightening, and said nothing more. They entered the building through revolving glass doors, greeted by the scent of polished marble and coffee. The lobby was enormous, full of people in tailored suits who moved with purpose. Lena followed quietly, her heels clicking against the floor, every sound magnified by her nerves. The elevator ride was silent except for the soft hum of motion. Ethan stared straight ahead. Richard, however, glanced at her reflection in the mirrored wall. You've been in buildings like this before, haven't you? He asked gently. Lena hesitated. Yes, but not for a long time. He nodded as if that confirmed something he already knew. When the elevator doors opened, they stepped into a hallway lined with glass offices. A secretary led them into a large conference room with a view of the skyline. At the table sat 4 men in suits, investors by the look of them, all with polite smiles and cold eyes that calculated everything. Mr. Rowe, one of them greeted, shaking Richard's hand. And this must be your son, the prodigy behind the software company. Ethan smiled thinly. That's me. The introductions were formal, brisk, and practiced. No one noticed Lena at first. She stayed near the corner of the room, feeling out of place among the confident postures and the scent of money and ambition. Once everyone sat, Richard leaned slightly forward. Gentlemen, before we begin, I'd like to introduce someone unexpected, Miss Lena Moritz. She joined us this morning under rather unusual circumstances. The investors exchanged puzzled glances. Ethan stiffened. Dad, he hissed under his breath. This isn't the time for. But Richard continued as if he hadn't heard. She's an entrepreneur herself in a way. A woman who knows what it means to build something from nothing. I believe fresh eyes might give us a useful perspective today. Lena felt every pair of eyes turn toward her. For a moment, she wished the floor would open beneath her. She managed a small, respectful nod. Good morning, she said quietly. The investors nodded back, politely indifferent. One of them murmured something about creative introductions, and then the conversation turned to business. As the presentation began, Ethan's voice filled the room. Confident, fast, full of the rehearsed rhythm of someone who's pitched too many times before. He spoke about market growth, predictive analytics, and algorithmic automation. His slides were flawless. His words flowed like water. And yet, something was missing. Lena could see it. The way the investors' eyes glazed slightly, the subtle fidgeting, the tapping of pens. They weren't convinced. The numbers made sense, but the vision felt cold, lifeless. Richard seemed to notice it too. He glanced briefly toward her, a spark of curiosity in his expression, as if silently asking, "What do you see?" Lena looked down at the polished table, unsure if she should speak. Who was she to interrupt this world of power suits and capital flows? Then she remembered the sound of her berries being crushed under that car. The way Ethan had looked at her like she was nothing. And the way Richard had looked at her like she was something. When Ethan finished, a polite silence followed. One investor cleared his throat. Your technology is impressive, Mr. Rowe, but I'm not convinced the market's ready. What makes your platform different from the 5 others we've seen this quarter? Ethan began to answer, his tone growing defensive. The investors exchanged skeptical looks. Richard rubbed his temple. The meeting was slipping. Lena's pulse quickened. Her heart told her to stay silent. Her mind told her to speak. She opened her mouth. Excuse me, she said softly. The room went still. All eyes turned to her again. Surprise, mild annoyance, curiosity. Ethan shot her a glare that could have frozen glass. But Richard leaned back, folding his hands. Go ahead, Miss Moritz. Lena met the investors' gazes. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied. You're asking what makes it different. But maybe the question should be, who is it for? The investors exchanged glances. She continued, "You're hearing about algorithms, automation, optimization, but that's language for developers, not for customers. You don't sell technology. You sell the change it brings to people's lives. Right now, all you've shown them is code." The silence stretched. Then slowly one of the investors nodded. "That's actually a fair point," he said. Richard smiled faintly. Ethan stared at her, speechless. Lena lowered her gaze again, her cheeks burning. She hadn't planned to say anything. The words had simply come out. "Well," Richard said smoothly, breaking the silence, "perhaps that's a good moment to pause before we continue." He stood, gesturing toward the door. "Why don't we take a short break? Lena, would you step outside with me for a moment?" Once in the hallway, away from the glass walls and tense air, Richard turned to her with a look she couldn't read. "You have instinct," he said quietly. "Real instinct. You didn't hesitate when it mattered." Lena swallowed hard. "I probably shouldn't have spoken. I'm sorry." "Don't be," he said, smiling. "That kind of honesty is rare in boardrooms. You reminded them that people still matter." He studied her for a long moment. "Tell me, Lena, if you could start something of your own again, not just a roadside stand but a real business, what would it be?" She hesitated, surprised by the question. "Something natural," she said slowly. "Sustainable. A brand that connects people to real food, wild berries, herbs, forest products. Honest work. Something that helps others rebuild their lives, the way I've been trying to rebuild mine." Richard nodded, his expression softening. "That's a vision worth investing in." Lena blinked. "You mean?" He raised a hand. "Not a promise, but an open door. You walked through one today already. Maybe it's time you walk through another." Before she could respond, a voice called from the conference room. "Mr. Rowe, we're ready to continue." Richard straightened his jacket. "Let's go, Miss Moritz. I have a feeling this meeting isn't quite over yet." When they returned to the conference room, the atmosphere had shifted. The investors who had seemed distracted before now leaned forward. Their pens poised, their attention sharpened. Something about what Lena had said, simple, unpolished, and real, had punctured the careful bubble of corporate detachment. Ethan was still standing near the screen. His slide paused mid-sentence. He looked from his father to Lena, his expression unreadable, a mix of confusion, frustration, and something else she couldn't quite place. Richard took his seat with unhurried grace. "Gentlemen," he said smoothly, "shall we continue?" The lead investor nodded. "Yes, but I'd like to hear more about what Miss Moritz mentioned." Lena froze. "Me?" Richard smiled faintly. "You started the question. Perhaps you can finish it." She hesitated, feeling every heartbeat echo in her chest. Her instinct was to shrink, to let the moment pass. But then she caught her reflection in the glossy tabletop. The neat suit, the straight shoulders, the steady gaze. She remembered the woman she used to be before her life unraveled, and the woman she had decided to become again. So she spoke. "When I ran my roadside stand," she began, "I learned that people don't buy what you make, they buy what it means to them. A jar of jam isn't just food. It's a memory. It's trust. You're not selling an algorithm or a platform. You're selling what it can give back to the people who use it." She looked directly at the investors. "Right now, this product speaks like a machine. But if it spoke like a person, about saving time, reducing stress, empowering small business owners, then you're not just offering technology. You're offering a partner." A quiet murmur moved through the room. Ethan's jaw tightened. "So what, we turn our tech company into a charity?" Lena turned to him, calm but firm. "No. You turn it into something human. That's what sells. That's what lasts." The lead investor smiled for the first time. "She's right. We've seen 100 innovations this quarter. But none of them made us feel anything." He turned to Ethan. "If you can integrate what she's describing, a customer-centric layer, a story, we'd be interested in continuing this discussion." Richard's lips curved into a slow, satisfied smile. "Then I think we have a path forward." The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with polite handshakes and promises of follow-up calls. As the room emptied, Ethan gathered his papers wordlessly. He didn't look at Lena. When the door finally closed behind the last investor, he turned to his father. That was a circus, he snapped. You bring in some stranger off the road, she interrupts my presentation, and somehow she's the reason they're investing? Richard leaned back in his chair. No, Ethan. You built the product. She reminded them why it matters. You both needed each other more than you realized. Ethan exhaled sharply, looking away. Lena stood by the window, uncertain whether to stay or leave. The city stretched below her. Cranes, rooftops, the shimmer of late morning sunlight glinting off glass. It looked both familiar and impossibly far away from the muddy roadside she'd left behind that morning. Richard stood and approached her. You have a gift, Lena. You see through the noise. I'd like to offer you something. She blinked. An offer? He nodded. My firm invests in people, not just companies. You said you wanted to build something sustainable, something real. I can give you the backing to start that, if you're willing to put in the work. Her breath caught. You'd invest in me? After one conversation. He smiled. After one truthful conversation. Those are rarer than you think. Before she could respond, Ethan spoke, quieter now, his tone different. You really think she can handle something like that? Richard turned to him. I think she already did. You saw it yourself. Ethan hesitated. His pride warred visibly with the facts. Then finally he sighed. Fine. She was good. I'll admit it. Lena gave a small smile. That's very generous of you. He almost smiled back, almost. Don't get used to it. Richard chuckled. Excellent. Then it's settled. He turned to Lena again. Come by my office tomorrow at 9. We'll discuss your proposal, your real one, not the roadside version. Lena nodded slowly, the words barely registering. I'll be there. As they left the building, the afternoon light broke through the clouds for the first time all day. The city glimmered gold, the air crisp with the scent of rain. For a long moment, Lena simply stood at the curb, watching people pass. Businesswomen, couriers, dreamers. She had come to the city once as one of them and left defeated. Now, she was returning not as a runaway, but as someone beginning again. Ethan unlocked the car door, pausing just long enough to glance at her. So, he said, you really think you can turn berries into business? Lena smiled faintly. I don't just think it. I know it. He shook his head, half amused, half intrigued. You're insane. Probably, she said. But so are most people who build something that matters. As the car pulled away from the curb, the city stretched out before them. Endless, daunting, full of possibility. And somewhere deep inside her, beneath the exhaustion and disbelief, Lena felt it. That quiet, stubborn spark that had kept her going all along. Not hope this time, something stronger. Conviction. The next morning arrived wrapped in pale light, and the sound of distant traffic. Lena woke early, though she'd barely slept. Her mind had replayed the events of the previous day in endless loops. The crash, the meeting, Richard's offer. It still didn't feel real. The small rented room she slept in looked the same as always. Bare walls, one chair, a cracked mirror, and the scent of old wood. But somehow, it felt smaller now, like the past was already starting to outgrow it. She stood before the mirror, adjusting the navy jacket Richard had bought her. It fit perfectly, maybe too perfectly. It wasn't just fabric, it was expectation. Her reflection met her gaze. Don't freeze, she whispered to herself. Not today. Outside, the city hummed to life. She caught the early train, watching the skyline grow larger through the window. Every stop brought her closer to a future she hadn't dared imagine 24 hours earlier. When she reached the towering office building, she paused at the entrance. The same revolving glass door she'd walked through yesterday, but this time, something was different. She wasn't following anyone now. She was walking in on her own terms. The receptionist recognized her immediately. Good morning, Miss Moritz. Mr. Rowe is expecting you. 22nd floor. Lena smiled politely and stepped into the elevator. As it ascended, she watched her reflection in the mirrored walls. A woman on the edge of something vast and unknown. When the doors opened, Richard was waiting in his office, standing beside a wide window that offered a sweeping view of the city. He turned as she entered, smiling warmly. Right on time. I knew you would be. I don't like wasting chances, she said. He gestured for her to sit. Good. You won't get many like this. On the desk lay a sleek folder labeled Moritz Organics. The sight of her name printed in professional font made her throat tighten. I took the liberty of sketching out a preliminary business structure, Richard said, sliding the folder toward her. Distribution, branding, potential investors. You'll need a full proposal, of course, but this is a starting point. Lena hesitated before opening it. Why are you doing this for me? Richard leaned back in his chair. Because I believe in timing. Yesterday you showed me that you can read a room, speak truth, and see what others miss. That's what leadership looks like. You reminded my son of that too, though he won't admit it yet. As if on cue, the office door opened. Ethan stepped in, looking freshly pressed but wary. You called me? Yes, Richard said. You're going to help Lena build her first pitch deck. Ethan blinked. You want me to? Yes. Richard's tone left no room for debate. You have the experience. She has the vision. Together, you might actually create something worthwhile. Lena bit back a smile. Ethan's expression was a mix of disbelief and reluctant intrigue. Richard clasped his hands. You both start today. My advice? Try not to kill each other before lunch. He stood and moved toward the door. I'll be in meetings until 3. Impress me when I get back. And with that, he was gone, leaving silence and the faint hum of the city beyond the glass. Ethan exhaled slowly, dragging a chair to the other side of the desk. So, he said dryly, looks like we're business partners. Or whatever this is. Lena opened the folder and looked up at him. You don't sound thrilled. I'm not, he admitted. But my father's never wrong about people. So prove me wrong instead. She met his gaze evenly. Gladly. They spent the next several hours in quiet tension. Ethan explaining technical structures and funding stages, Lena scribbling notes, interrupting often with pointed questions. He was sharp, efficient, but a little too proud. She was determined, intuitive, unwilling to let him dominate the room. Your concept has heart, he said finally, tapping the page. But investors don't buy heart. They buy numbers. And customers don't buy numbers, she countered. They buy meaning. If you want this to scale, we have to connect both. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Not quite rivals. Not yet allies. Then, to her surprise, Ethan smiled faintly. You're stubborn. Thank you, she said. So are you. He leaned back in his chair, amused. Maybe this could actually work. By early afternoon, they had the outline of something real. A startup that would partner with local farmers, promote organic produce through direct digital marketplaces, and reinvest profits into rural communities. It was raw, ambitious, and a little idealistic, but it felt alive. When Richard returned, he found them both standing by the whiteboard, arguing about logistics and sketching flowcharts with markers. He paused in the doorway, a small smile tugging at his mouth. Now this, he said, looks promising. Lena turned, her face flushed with excitement. We've mapped a full concept. It's rough, but it's real. Ethan crossed his arms. I'll admit, she's got a mind for business. Richard chuckled. I never doubted it. He stepped closer, looking over their notes. You've both done well. We'll move this forward, slowly, carefully. Lena, I'll assign a mentor from our venture team to help refine your proposal. Ethan, you'll oversee development support. Lena blinked. You're serious? As a contract, Richard said. You'll both have a chance to make something that matters. But, he fixed them both with a shrewd look. Don't forget why this started. Not out of luck. Out of collision. Ethan nodded slowly. Collision, huh? Richard smiled. Sometimes that's how all great partnerships begin. He left them again, his footsteps fading down the hall. Ethan looked at her. You really think we can turn this idea into something? Lena looked at the city outside the window, sunlight glinting off the glass towers like promise. I don't think, she said softly. I know. He followed her gaze, and for the first time, his smile wasn't sarcastic. Then let's build it. The two of them stood in silence. Unlikely partners, bound by accident, pride, and the strange momentum of second chances. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the scent of rain and asphalt. And somewhere beyond the skyline, the faint sweetness of wild berries, waiting to grow again. 2 weeks later, the project that had started with coffee stains and scribbled flowcharts was taking shape. The office corner Richard had assigned to Lena and Ethan overflowed with drafts, reports, and arguments. A chaotic dance between her passion for people and his obsession with precision. They worked long hours, often past sunset. The tension between them was constant but strangely productive. They fought over every decision, and yet kept finding common ground. One evening, Lena sat hunched over her laptop, typing up survey results from a group of local farmers she'd contacted. Ethan leaned against the window, scrolling through spreadsheets. "Your data's too optimistic," he said without looking up. "And yours is too cold," she replied, fingers still flying across the keys. He turned, arms crossed. "Business isn't built on sentiment. Investors don't care about stories from the countryside, they care about scalability." She stopped typing. "You really think numbers are the whole story?" "I know they are," he said firmly. Lena rose and faced him, her voice calm but cutting. "Then maybe that's why your last 2 ventures failed." The silence that followed was electric. Ethan's jaw tightened. His pride took the hit squarely. "You don't know anything about me," he said at last. "No," she admitted. "But I can tell when someone's afraid to feel invested. You keep treating business like armor. But people can sense when something's built without heart, and they don't trust it." He looked away, visibly unsettled. "You sound like my father." "Then maybe he's right," she said softly. The air between them grew heavy, and neither spoke again that night. By morning, the mood had shifted. Ethan arrived earlier than usual, carrying 2 coffees. He set one on her desk without a word. "Peace offering," he muttered. Lena looked at him for a long moment before taking a sip. "Truce accepted for now." He smiled faintly. "Good. Because we've got an investor preview tomorrow." Her heart skipped. "Tomorrow? You're kidding." He shook his head. "Richard wants to see the prototype presentation. Slides, projections, everything. If it impresses him, he'll fund the first phase himself." Lena exhaled. "All right then. Let's make it count." The next day felt like walking into a storm. Richard sat at the head of the conference table, watching them with his usual quiet composure. A few advisors flanked him, murmuring over financial printouts. Ethan began the presentation, steady, confident, technical. He spoke about digital supply chains, eco-certifications, and logistics partnerships. The numbers looked solid, the graphs impressive. Then it was Lena's turn. She stood, hands trembling slightly, and began to talk, not from notes, but from memory. She spoke about the rural families she'd met, about the taste of berries grown in untouched soil, about how small producers could rise again through ethical commerce and transparent trade. Her words painted pictures instead of numbers, but somehow they filled the room with something Ethan's slides never could believe. When she finished, Richard was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Ethan, your analysis is excellent. But without her story, it's lifeless. Together, you might actually pull this off." Ethan nodded, humbled. "I know." One of the advisors leaned forward. "If you two can merge this, the data and the emotion, it's fundable." Lena glanced at Ethan. For the first time, they shared a look that wasn't defiance but recognition. That evening, they walked out of the building together. The city lights shimmered on wet asphalt after a brief rain. "You were incredible in there," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "So were you," Lena admitted. "Even if you talk too fast when you're nervous." He smirked. "And you wave your hands too much when you're passionate." They laughed. The first genuine laugh they'd shared since the accident. Then unexpectedly his voice softened. "You know, I used to think business was just control. But you make it feel like purpose again." Lena looked at him, unsure how to respond. The streetlight caught his face just right, proud but different now. Less armor, more humanity. Before she could speak, his phone buzzed. He frowned at the screen, expression darkening. "Everything okay?" He hesitated, then sighed. "Not really. One of my previous investors just pulled out of another project. If they go public, it could tank my reputation, and the Roe name along with it. So this new venture matters more than ever," she said. He nodded grimly. "Exactly." Lena put a hand on his arm. "Then we'll make it work. For both of us." Their eyes met. something unspoken passing between them, half challenge, half promise. The night wind swept through the streets, carrying the scent of rain and possibility. They didn't know it yet, but the fractures between them, pride, fear, vulnerability, were not breaking points. They were seams, and something new was beginning to grow through them. The next few weeks felt like flight. Lena and Ethan worked side by side in perfect rhythm, the kind that happens only when two strong wills finally begin to trust each other. What had started as friction turned into fuel. Their late-night brainstorming sessions stretched past midnight, filled with whiteboard scrawls, empty coffee cups, and laughter that echoed through the quiet office halls. The HarvestLink project, as they now called it, began to look real. A hybrid model, digital marketplace meets ethical trade network, connecting small producers directly with urban customers. It was bold, modern, and risky, and investors were starting to whisper about it. Ethan watched Lena with growing admiration. She didn't just work, she breathed the project. She remembered every supplier's name, every statistic, every dream behind the data. Her energy pulled people in like gravity. One evening as they packed up, he said quietly, "You know, I used to think this was just another pitch deck, but you've made it something more." Lena smiled. "That's because it is something more. It's not just about profit. It's about people being seen again." Ethan hesitated, then asked, "Do you ever regret coming with us that day?" She looked at him, thoughtful. "At first, yes. But now," her eyes softened, "now I think fate sometimes wears strange disguises, like a speeding car and a ruined tent." He laughed under his breath. "Guess I should crash more often." "Don't push your luck," she said, but there was warmth in her voice. They lingered by the glass doors, the city skyline flickering like an ocean of lights behind them. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was charged, fragile, alive. The next morning, everything changed. Richard called an emergency meeting. His face was grave, his tone clipped. "We've got a problem," he said. "A major one." He laid out a series of printed emails, correspondence from a former investor who had leaked confidential documents about Ethan's earlier failed ventures. The story was spreading fast. The press had already picked it up. Ethan paled. "This could ruin us." Richard nodded grimly. "It could. And by association, Lena, it might damage your project before it even launches." Lena swallowed hard. "What do we do?" "Damage control," Richard said. "We pull the upcoming investor pitch, freeze all external communication, and wait until this storm passes." Ethan slammed his fist lightly on the table. "That'll kill our momentum. The press will twist silence into guilt." Richard's voice hardened. "Better silence than recklessness. One wrong move and you'll burn the bridge before it's built." Ethan looked at Lena, frustration in his eyes. "You agree with this?" She met his gaze evenly. "I agree we have to be smart. But hiding won't help either." He exhaled sharply and walked to the window, running a hand through his hair. "You don't understand, they've been waiting to destroy me. This was my one shot to prove I'm not just my father's shadow." Lena stood, moving closer. "Then prove it. Not by running but by fighting back with truth, transparency, and the thing they don't expect from you. Humility." Ethan turned toward her, something raw flickering in his eyes. "You really think that'll work?" "I think," she said softly, "it's your only way to start over." That night, the two of them sat in the darkened office, drafting a statement. Lena crafted the words. Ethan refined the tone. It wasn't a defense, it was an admission. An acknowledgement of his past mistakes, the lessons learned, and a renewed vision through HarvestLink. When they finished, Ethan leaned back, exhausted. "It's honest," he said. "It's real," Lena replied. He glanced at her, his voice quieter now. "You keep saving me from myself." She smiled faintly. "No. You're just starting to see who you could be." He watched her for a long moment, the glow of the desk lamp soft on her face, and realized with unsettling clarity that his admiration had become something deeper. "Lena," he began, but the words caught in his throat. She met his gaze, her heartbeat quickening. "Yes." Before he could answer, Richard's voice echoed from the hallway. "Still working." They both straightened, flustered. "Good," Richard said as he stepped in. "You'll need it." The investors moved up the meeting. It's tomorrow morning. Tomorrow. Ethan repeated, stunned. Richard nodded. They want to hear how you'll recover from this crisis. It's not just a test of the project anymore. It's a test of character. He looked between them, his eyes shrewd but kind. I trust you'll both know what to say. After he left, Ethan sank back into his chair, rubbing his temples. A test of character, he muttered. Lena smiled faintly. Then let's make sure we pass. He looked at her, really looked, and nodded slowly. Together. Outside, a thunderstorm rolled across the horizon, splitting the night sky with flashes of silver. Inside, the light from their office window glowed against the dark, two silhouettes working side by side against the storm. Neither of them noticed the time anymore. The spark that had begun as conflict was now something else entirely. Fragile, dangerous, and bright enough to change both their lives. The storm outside had barely faded by morning, and the city woke under a bruised sky. Lena barely slept, her mind tangled with rehearsed answers, investor questions, and the quiet, impossible awareness of Ethan sitting across from her at 3 a.m., half asleep, still trying to protect everything he'd built. By 8 o'clock, the conference room was ready. Richard stood at the head of the long glass table, expression unreadable. A half-dozen investors joined via video screens, their faces framed in crisp rectangles, cold and analytical. Ethan adjusted his tie with mechanical precision. Lena stood beside him, clutching a single notepad, her version of armor. Richard began. Thank you all for attending. As you're aware, recent events have put certain questions on the table. Today, we'll address them directly. He nodded to Ethan. You have the floor. Ethan's pulse thudded in his ears. He could feel the weight of the room pressing down on him. Judgment, skepticism, memory. For the first time in years, he didn't have a rehearsed defense. Only the truth. He took a breath. You've all seen the reports. Yes, I made mistakes. I took risks I shouldn't have. I overestimated markets, underestimated people. And I paid for it, financially and personally. A murmur rippled through the room. He continued, voice steadier now. But those failures taught me something numbers never could. Success without accountability means nothing. Which is why I'm building differently this time. Not alone. Not behind closed doors. He turned slightly toward Lena. This project, Harvest Link, isn't just another business model. It's a promise to rebuild trust between producers and consumers, between the land and the cities that depend on it, and between people like me and those I once ignored. Lena's eyes flickered with quiet pride. He nodded toward her. Lena Moritz started this with nothing but a patch of land and an idea. She reminded me that value doesn't start in boardrooms. It starts in soil, in effort, in honesty. I'm asking you to invest not just in a company, but in that principle. When he finished, the room was silent. Even the storm outside seemed to hold its breath. Then one of the investors, a woman with sharp glasses and a sharper voice, said, Honest speech, Mr. Rowe. But honesty doesn't balance budgets. What guarantees do we have that this time will be different? Ethan glanced at Lena. She stepped forward. Because this time, she said, it's not just Ethan Rowe's project. It's ours. Our contracts, our data, our profits. Everything will be transparent. Every supplier will be verified, every process traceable. We're not asking for blind faith. We're asking for partnership. Her tone was calm but commanding, the kind of quiet conviction that makes even cynics pause. The investor folded her arms. You're not afraid your idealism will cost you? Lena smiled faintly. If idealism is believing that good business can still do good, then no, I'm not afraid of that cost. Richard's lips curved in the faintest smile. Another investor spoke. You have guts, Ms. Moritz. And a rare kind of clarity. I'm in, on one condition. Full quarterly transparency reports and shared oversight. Agreed, Ethan said instantly. Within minutes, 2 more investors followed. By the end of the hour, Harvest Link had secured its initial funding. When the call ended, the room fell into stunned silence. Ethan looked at Lena, the disbelief in his expression melting into something warmer, something real. We did it. She laughed softly, the sound breaking through the tension like sunlight through storm clouds. No, you did it. You showed them who you really are. He shook his head. No. You showed me first. Richard cleared his throat. Before this turns into a love letter, he said dryly. Remember, this was just the first hurdle. The real work starts now. But there was pride in his tone, the kind he rarely showed. Ethan grinned. Understood. As the meeting dissolved, Lena gathered her papers. Her hands trembled slightly, from exhaustion, adrenaline, and something she didn't quite dare name. Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. Dinner tonight. Not business, just a pause before the next storm. She hesitated, then nodded. All right. But no talking about projections. No promises, he said with a grin. That evening they met at a small rooftop restaurant overlooking the city. The air was cool, the lights below soft and endless. They talked about their pasts, about mistakes, about the strange paths that had led them here. At one point Lena said quietly, You know, when I left the countryside I thought I'd lost everything that made me matter. But maybe I just needed to find where it fits. Ethan looked at her for a long time before saying, You haven't lost anything. You've just been waiting for the right people to see it. For a moment their world was only the space between their words. Fragile, unspoken, but alive. Then Ethan's phone buzzed. He frowned. Richard. He answered quickly. Dad? What's? Richard's voice was sharp. Come back to the office. Now. Something's wrong with the investor files. Someone leaked internal documents. Again. Lena froze. Again. Ethan's face went pale. No, that's impossible. Richard's tone turned grim. It's not. And this time it leads straight back to your department. The line went dead. Lena stared at Ethan. What does that mean? He stood slowly, his expression dark. It means someone's trying to destroy us, from the inside. The city lights flickered below, and thunder rumbled once more in the distance. The reckoning had only just begun. Rain slicked the streets again that night as Ethan and Lena raced back to the office. The building loomed ahead like a shard of glass cutting through the storm. Too bright, too silent. Inside, Richard stood near the main screen in the conference room. Arms crossed, eyes like tempered steel. On the wall behind him glowed a cascade of data, timestamps, access logs, and one name highlighted in red. Access source, ERO, department account. Lena froze. No. Ethan stared at the screen, disbelief breaking across his face. That's not possible. I didn't. Richard held up a hand. Sit down. Dad, you know I wouldn't do this, Ethan said, his voice strained. Someone must have cloned my credentials. Or you got reckless again, Richard interrupted, his tone sharp. It wouldn't be the first time you let your pride blind you. Lena stepped forward. Sir, I've been with him every night this week. He hasn't left my sight long enough to. Loyalty is admirable, Ms. Moritz, Richard said evenly. But the system doesn't lie. Ethan's jaw clenched. Neither do I. Richard sighed, rubbing his temple. For the first time since she'd met him, Lena saw something flicker behind his composure. Disappointment, maybe even fear. The investors are already calling, he said quietly. They want assurances this isn't a repeat of your last collapse. If I can't give them that, then what? Ethan demanded. You'll throw me under the bus? Richard met his eyes. If it means saving this company, yes. The room fell silent. The rain beat harder against the glass. Lena felt something twist in her chest. There has to be another explanation, she said. Someone inside could have. Richard cut her off. Find it. You've got 48 hours before the board freezes funding. After that, Harvest Link dies with it. He turned and left the room, his footsteps echoing down the empty corridor. Ethan sank into a chair, staring at nothing. He thinks I did it. Again. Lena sat beside him. Then we prove you didn't. He looked up slowly. You'd help me? After this. She nodded. You're not the man those files make you out to be. I've seen who you really are. Something broke behind his guarded eyes, a mix of gratitude and disbelief. Then let's find whoever's trying to destroy us. They dove into the data that night, tracing every login, every transaction, every tiny breadcrumb the system left behind. Ethan's technical expertise and Lena's intuitive logic worked in perfect rhythm. At 2 a.m., Lena spotted something. A discrepancy in the access log metadata. Wait, she whispered. Look at this. The timestamp matches your account, but the location tag. Ethan leaned in. That's not my terminal. No. It's one floor down, the old development lab. He stood abruptly. That lab's been empty for months. Apparently not, Lena said, grabbing her coat. Let's go. The lab was dark, the only light coming from the glow of inactive monitors. Dust lay thick on the desks, except one near the back, where a faint blue light blinked beneath a pile of cables. Ethan powered the terminal. It booted up to a login screen already open, under his name. Someone's been using your credentials, Lena whispered. Remotely accessing from here. He frowned, scanning the directory. Wait. There's a hidden partition. He entered a few commands and a list of files appeared. Copied project data, internal emails, and confidential investor lists. Lena's pulse quickened. Who would even know where to find this? Before Ethan could answer, a voice came from the doorway. I would. They turned. Standing in the shadows was Dylan, Ethan's former project manager. The one Richard had quietly dismissed months ago after a failed merger. Ethan's voice was low, dangerous. You. Dylan stepped forward, hands raised. Relax. I just came to even the score. You stole our data, Lena said, disbelief turning to anger. Dylan shrugged. You stole my career. Fair trade. You sabotaged me, Ethan snapped. You cost people jobs. And you think you didn't? Dylan's smile was sharp and bitter. You crashed your last startup into the ground and walked away clean while everyone else paid for it. This time I made sure you'd feel what that's like. Lena stepped between them. You don't get to destroy something good just to make a point. Dylan's expression flickered. Something good? You really think this project changes anything? It's still built on privilege. On his name. Ethan took a step closer. Then take it up with me. Not her. Dylan hesitated, then lunged for the terminal. Ethan caught him, slamming him against the desk. The monitor cracked, cables snapping loose. Stop! Lena shouted. Dylan shoved Ethan back, grabbed a hard drive from the table and bolted for the door. Ethan sprinted after him, shouting, Lena, kill the system. Wipe everything. She jumped to the terminal and began a rapid series of commands. The screens flickered, then went dark, data erased, at least locally. Outside, she heard shouting, footsteps splashing through puddles, the sound of a scuffle. By the time she reached the lobby, Dylan was gone. Ethan stood under the fluorescent lights, breathing hard, rain soaking through his shirt. He got away, he said. But the data's useless without the servers. Lena nodded, catching her breath. We can still prove he did it. The access logs, the fingerprints. Ethan looked toward the glass doors, where the city lights reflected like broken shards. He won't stop. Not until we're ruined. She stepped closer, meeting his eyes. Then we don't give him the chance. For a long moment they just stood there. Two silhouettes in a half-lit lobby, soaked, exhausted but unbroken. The betrayal had shaken everything. Trust, loyalty, even the fragile connection between them. But beneath it all, something fierce and steady remained. The will to fight, not just for the company but for each other. Outside, the rain began to slow. And somewhere beyond the clouds, morning was waiting. Let me know how you liked my story. And be sure to subscribe to our channel. A new story will be posted here tomorrow.